The red Sahelian sun rose slowly above Ouagadougou, casting long golden rays across the courthouse square where a small crowd had already gathered. It was the kind of dawn that felt symbolic before anything symbolic was even said. Merchants paused mid-setup at their stalls. Students on bicycles slowed to listen to the murmured conversations rippling through the city. And in the cool, dust-scented breeze that drifted along the broad avenues, anticipation hung as thick as harmattan mist. For months, the nation had been whispering about what was coming. A new era, they called it. A break from the old dependence, from the tired cycles of extraction without transformation, from the burdens of external dictates. Words like sovereignty, rebirth, and renaissance had seeped into everyday language. Citizens used them casually, confidently, as if they could already see the future walking toward them. And on this particular morning, the whispers burst into something larger. Inside the National Museum's Grand Hall, a handful of journalists, diplomats, miners, engineers, and government officials gathered around a long table draped with a woven Burkinabe cloth. At its center sat a square black chest with gold stitching. Guards stood at the corners, their expressions unreadable. The room felt strangely silent, as though everyone were collectively holding their breath. When the nation's leader stepped forward, the cameras clicked like a burst of summer rain. He raised a hand to calm the room and began to speak, not loudly, but with a steady confidence that echoed clearly off the carved walls. He spoke about the country's long history with gold, a history older than colonial cartography, older than any modern borders. He reminded them how gold once served as the pulse of empires across West Africa, how caravans carried it across the Sahara, how it financed universities, libraries, and astronomical observatories in a world that Europe had not yet fully awakened to. He spoke of dignity, of the value of labor, and of the belief that a resource found in one's soil should feed one's people first. As he spoke, something stirred in the audience. Pride, perhaps, or recognition. This was more than a ceremony. This was a statement. When he finally opened the chest, the hall erupted in gasps. There it lay, the nation's first fully processed local gold bar, minted not abroad but right here on native soil. Smooth, gleaming, unmistakably solid, it reflected the faces gathered around it with almost symbolic clarity. Engineers who had worked on the refining machines leaned forward with satisfaction. Miners who had spent their lives digging through unforgiving earth wiped tears from their eyes. And diplomats studied it with quiet calculation, knowing the geopolitical implications were immense. For years, the country had exported unprocessed ore, shipping wealth to foreign refineries that pocketed the added value. For decades, global institutions preached development while discouraging industrial independence. But now the narrative had shifted. With the unveiling of this single gold bar, the country had taken a leap into a new chapter, one carved not by foreign hands, but by its own. But the gold bar was only half the story. The other half lay in a partnership that had taken the world by surprise. Months before this historic unveiling, a delegation from India had arrived under the radar. There was no fanfare, no grand announcement, only quiet meetings between engineers, economists, and technology experts. India, long navigating its own dual identity between global South solidarity and global economic ambition, understood the significance of industrial sovereignty. And it saw something in this West African nation that others had overlooked, potential not just for resource extraction, but for transformation, innovation, and long-term collaboration. The deal that formed over the following weeks was unprecedented. It included technology transfers for mineral processing, training programs for local engineers, joint research initiatives on sustainable mining, and most importantly, the financing and construction of a state-of-the-art local refinery. It was a partnership rooted not in charity, but in shared ambition. A partnership that sent shockwaves through traditional power centers in Europe and North America. For too long, African nations had been relegated to the role of raw material suppliers in a global system that rewarded dependency. But this new alliance signaled a break in the chain, a pivot toward a multipolar economic future driven by cooperation between rising powers of the global South. The early signs of discomfort were visible. Analysts in Western capitals wrote cautious opinion pieces about shifting alliances. Financial institutions issued subtle warnings about economic risks. Diplomats made polite but pointed inquiries about the nature of the Indo-African cooperation. But the message from Ouagadougou was clear. The country would chart its own path, with partners who respected its autonomy. The unveiling ceremony continued with speeches from miners' unions, local engineers who explained the design of the refinery, and Indian technical advisors who spoke passionately about the shared future ahead. The crowd reacted warmly to the notion that two post-colonial nations, each with its own scars and victories, could rewrite the terms of global engagement through mutual respect. Outside the museum, loudspeakers broadcast the event to crowds assembled in parks, marketplaces, and university campuses. Everywhere, people paused to watch history unfold. In Bobo de Lasso, a group of young entrepreneurs gathered around a television in a small co-working space, nodding as the leader spoke about technology incubators that would soon partner with Indian software firms. In Kaya, elders in traditional robes listened intently from under a neem tree, remembering the long fights for land and dignity that had brought the country to this moment. In Fata and Gurma, artisanal miners paused their work, smiling proudly as they heard that new training programs would finally bring their knowledge into the formal sector. This was not just a national moment. It was an emotional one. The leader concluded his speech by lifting the gold bar high above the podium. "This," he said, "is not merely gold. It is proof of what Africa can do when Africa decides to do it." The room erupted in applause, shouts of celebration, flashes from cameras capturing the moment that would soon appear on screens around the world. But beyond the symbolism, the implications of this achievement stretched deep into the geopolitical fabric of the continent. For years, the Sahel had been painted as a zone of crisis, conflict, insurgency, drought, and geopolitical tug-of-war between old and new powers. Narratives of instability overshadowed the stories of cultural resilience, innovation, and regional solidarity emerging from within. But now, by unveiling a local gold bar backed by strong Southern partnerships, the country had rebranded itself not as a victim of geopolitical currents, but as a driver of them. Students at the University of Ouagadougou celebrated wildly, waving flags and chanting slogans about sovereignty. In lecture halls, professors explained how refining natural resources locally would boost GDP, create jobs, and strengthen the currency. In the markets, vendors discussed how the new revenue might help stabilize prices and bring investments to rural areas long neglected by international development models. Meanwhile, in New Delhi, analysts tracked the ceremony closely, recognizing the deep strategic value of the partnership. India had long sought to strengthen ties with Africa, not through extraction or coercion, but through cooperation, knowledge exchange, and technological support. The deal represented not just economic strategy, but ideological alignment. Two nations from the global south choosing to redefine their positions within the global order. Global reactions were swift. In Paris, newspapers expressed concern about waning influence. In Washington, think tanks published reports about the expanding role of emerging powers in Africa. In Brussels, policymakers quietly debated whether Europe needed to reassess its investment approach across the continent. But in Ouagadougou, none of this noise mattered. The conversation was centered on pride and possibility. After the ceremony, the gold bar was escorted through the streets in a transparent armored capsule as part of a symbolic procession. Citizens lined the roads, singing, drumming, and waving as it passed, their joy radiating like the sun itself. It was a celebration not of wealth, but of agency. As the procession moved, the leader's convoy followed behind. Windows rolled down to greet the cheering crowds. Advisors inside the vehicle discussed next steps, expanding the refinery, training more metallurgists, formalizing artisanal mining cooperatives, and launching a gold-backed sovereign fund that would invest in agriculture, education, and renewable energy. The gold bar was only the beginning. The partnership with India had opened doors to a new development model, one built on technology, self-reliance, and regional solidarity. Already, Nigeria, Ghana, Mali, and Tanzania were expressing interest in similar cooperative frameworks. Analysts predicted a ripple effect across the continent, one that could reshape Africa's global economic role for decades. But beneath the celebrations and diplomatic maneuverings, deeper questions also brewed. Questions about sustainability, governance, and how to ensure that the benefits of this new era flowed to ordinary citizens rather than elites. The leader understood these concerns. He had lived long enough to witness the cycles of hope and disillusionment that had marked Africa's post-independence quest for development. He knew this moment must not be wasted. As night fell across the capital, decorative lights illuminated the refinery on the outskirts of the city. Workers stepped out to admire the new facility, its clean lines, humming machinery, and bright control panels standing as a testament to months of hard work. Indian engineers walked alongside Burkinabe technicians, exchanging ideas, sharing jokes, and planning improvements. It was the beginning of something larger than any one project. And far from the city lights, in a quiet northern village where desert winds whispered through acacia trees, a young girl named Awa held a small radio close to her ear, listening to the news report about the gold bar. She didn't fully understand the technicalities, but she understood pride. She understood hope. Her father, a farmer who had long struggled against drought, told her that this new era might bring irrigation systems to their region. Her mother, who sold vegetables at the weekly market, believed it might bring better roads, better prices, better futures. Awa simply smiled, imagining a tomorrow brighter than any she had known. Across the subregion, reactions unfolded with the complexity of shifting tectonic plates. In Bamako, radio hosts discussed how the rise of local refining in one Sahelian state might inspire a broader regional strategy. In Niamey, journalists speculated that the new refinery could spark cooperative gold certification standards across the Sahel, reducing dependence on European markets. And in Accra, where gold had long been a national export, policymakers watched closely, recognizing both the competition and the opportunity for new alliances within Africa itself. Some nations saw inspiration, others saw challenge. But all recognized that something fundamental had changed. In many ways, the Indo-African Partnership symbolized a deeper transformation taking place across the world, a slow, determined shift away from the unipolar economic order that had shaped global relations for decades. As Western economies faced internal turbulence, rising powers from Asia, Africa, and Latin America were forging new paths. The gold bar unveiled in Ouagadougou was more than precious metal. It was a marker in a global realignment. Inside a quiet conference room in the Ministry of Finance, experts and scholars gathered around a polished wooden table to analyze the implications. The air was heavy with the scent of strong tea and the faint hum of air conditioning struggling against the Sahelian heat. Papers lay scattered across the table, projections of gold revenue, diagrams of industrial zones, policy briefs on natural resource governance, and technical charts produced jointly with Indian analysts. The country's finance minister stood at the head of the table, tapping a finger thoughtfully against a chart. "This refinery," he said, "is the seed. But seeds must be planted in healthy soil. We cannot repeat past mistakes. If we refine gold but lose our governance, we gain nothing. If we earn revenue but fail to distribute it fairly, we create resentment. If we industrialize without environmental safeguards, we destroy the very land that nourishes us." Around the table, heads nodded. A legal scholar raised a hand. "We must update mining laws. Artisanal miners must be integrated, not marginalized. They have knowledge, experience, and communities built on trust. If we exclude them, we create conflict." An engineer added, "We also need technical universities to expand metallurgical programs. We cannot rely on foreign specialists forever. The partnership with India gives us a starting point, but sovereignty means building our own expertise." A younger economist, barely in her 30s, leaned forward with excitement. "This is our moment to create a sovereign wealth fund," she said. "Not like the oil funds of old that became playgrounds for elites. No, this fund must be transparent, audited, and invested in agriculture, solar energy, and industrial diversification. If we do this right, gold becomes the engine that moves every other sector." The minister listened carefully, aware of the weight on his shoulders. He knew the eyes of the world were watching, not just to observe success or failure, but to determine whether Africa's new vision of self-directed development was truly viable. And he understood that responsibility extended far beyond the country's borders. Later that week, he sat with his Indian counterpart in a discreet meeting room in New Delhi. The two men discussed technology transfer schedules, capacity-building programs, and long-term industrial plans. But beneath the technicalities lay a shared understanding. Both nations were navigating histories of external control and forging modern identities marked by determination and resilience. "We both know what it means to rise through difficulty," the Indian minister said. "This partnership must be about more than factories and refineries. It must be about rewriting the terms of engagement between our continents." The Burkinabe minister nodded. "And about ensuring our people see tangible change. Our success must not be measured in export charts, but in improved lives." Outside the meeting room, the sounds of a bustling Indian city filled the air. Engines, street vendors, distant laughter, the rhythmic pulse of a society in constant motion. It reminded him of home, where life bustled with equal energy and where hope now surged more strongly than it had in years. While diplomats worked to solidify agreements, the human dimension of the new economic era played out in everyday life. In a small mining town near Gawa, a group of artisanal miners gathered under a mango tree to debate the changes unfolding across the country. Some were optimistic, believing the refinery and training programs would finally formalize their work and provide safer conditions. Others were cautious, having experienced broken promises in the past. An elder named Karim spoke first. "For decades we have been digging, selling to intermediaries who took the profits. Now they say a new system will give us fair prices. I have seen too many changes that changed nothing." A younger miner responded passionately. "But this time is different. We saw the gold bar with our own eyes. We saw our engineers working with Indian technicians. This is not talk. This is action." Another miner pointed out that safety equipment had already started appearing: helmets, gloves, improved tools distributed through new cooperatives. Women miners, who often bore the brunt of unsafe conditions, spoke about the hope of new processing techniques that reduced exposure to toxic chemicals. Karim listened quietly, studying the faces around him. He wanted to believe. And yet he knew that real prosperity required more than technology. It required honesty, inclusivity, and good governance. Whether the new era realized its promise would depend not only on political leaders, but on the vigilance of citizens who refused to let their dreams be hijacked. Across the border in Ghana, the news of the refinery dominated political debates. Analysts argued that a wave of African-led refining facilities could transform the global gold market, shifting power from European refineries to African ones. Some predicted a rise in gold-backed African financial instruments. Others warned of regional competition that could either strengthen or fracture unity. But within Pan-African circles, the general sentiment was one of celebration. Across universities from Lagos to Nairobi, young Africans shared clips of the unveiling on social media, praising the symbolism of sovereignty and the promise of South-South cooperation. Hashtags spread rapidly, expressing pride not just for one nation but for the continent as a whole. At the same time, Western responses revealed growing unease. In European boardrooms, executives worried about losing access to cheap raw materials. Reports circulated about declining influence and the strategic challenge posed by Indo-African collaboration. Security agencies quietly assessed whether new partnerships in the Sahel might reduce Western leverage over the region's mineral supply chains. Some policymakers argued that Europe must re-engage Africa with better offers, though many Africans viewed such proposals with skepticism, having heard similar rhetoric many times before. In the United States, analysts on mainstream networks discussed the geopolitical implications, noting that India's growing footprint in Africa could alter global alliances. Yet, even in Washington, a quiet acknowledgement was emerging. Africa was no longer content to be an arena, it was becoming an actor. As global reactions swirled, the daily work of nation-building pressed on. Inside the new refinery, young technicians moved through brightly lit hallways, monitoring gauges, verifying temperatures, and analyzing ore samples in small glass vials. Indian metallurgists trained them rigorously, sometimes strict, sometimes playful, always determined to ensure that the knowledge transferred was thorough and permanent. One of the Burkinabe trainees, a young woman named Miriam, had grown up in a rural village where opportunities were scarce. She had studied metallurgy at a small technical institute, often working nights to pay for books. When the government announced scholarship programs to train refinery technicians, she applied without hesitating. Now, as she watched molten gold swirl inside industrial crucibles, she felt a profound sense of purpose. This refinery was not just a job, it was a symbol of transformation, a place where African and Indian knowledge blended into something powerful. Her mentor, an Indian engineer named Raghav, noticed her focus. "You know," he said one afternoon as they calibrated a machine, "when India built its first modern refineries, people doubted us. They said we lacked the expertise, the discipline, the foundation. But we proved them wrong. And now, you will do the same." Miriam smiled. "We intend to." Raghav's voice softened. "The world is changing. Alliances are shifting. Perhaps the future belongs to those who were once underestimated." Another technician across the room overheard their conversation and nodded. For too long, Africans were told to export raw materials while buying back finished goods. That era is ending. In the months that followed, the refinery became more than a workplace. It became a symbol of modern Africa rising, of shared ambition across continents, of youth stepping into industries once controlled entirely from abroad. At the same time, the government launched a nationwide campaign to explain the economic reforms associated with the Gold Initiative. Television programs broke down how refining added value. Community meetings educated rural populations about new cooperative structures. Schools launched modules on mineral economics, sparking the imaginations of students who had never before considered careers in industrial science. One of those students was Awa, the young girl from the northern village. Every evening, she sat with her notebook, copying diagrams of refineries she saw in newspapers, dreaming of becoming an engineer. Her parents encouraged her, telling her that this new era meant opportunities were no longer reserved for a select few. In her village, the partnership with India brought tangible changes. Engineers began surveying the area for solar microgrid installations that would power irrigation pumps. Agricultural experts discussed plans for seed research stations. Even healthcare workers spoke of new Indian-made medical equipment arriving soon. What had once been abstract geopolitical strategy was now touching the daily lives of ordinary people. Yet, as with all great transformations, challenges emerged. Smuggling networks, long profiting from the informal gold trade, reacted violently. Illegal brokers began circulating misinformation, claiming the new system would cut miners' incomes. Some foreign companies applied pressure through diplomatic channels, arguing that increased regulation would hurt investment. Corrupt actors within the system attempted to manipulate licenses and divert funds. The leader responded swiftly. He announced an anti-smuggling task force composed of security forces, miners' cooperatives, and financial regulators. New digital tracking systems were introduced to ensure transparency. Public reports were published to show citizens exactly how revenue was being allocated. Traditional chiefs were engaged to oversee local distribution and ensure fairness. The message was clear: the new economic era would not be stolen by old interests. Still, opposition persisted, quietly funded by those who feared losing influence. Social media campaigns attempted to sow division between artisanal miners and industrial operators. Rumors spread that foreign partners were secretly taking over national assets. But citizens, increasingly informed and engaged, countered these narratives with facts, unity, and determination. The turning point came during a public address in which the leader stood before a massive crowd and declared, "This partnership is not a handover, it is a handshake. We do not submit. We cooperate. And we welcome all who respect our sovereignty and our vision." The crowd roared, the words echoing across the capital like a pledge carved into stone. By now, the world understood that the unveiling of the gold bar had set events in motion that could not be undone. And yet, the most profound changes were happening quietly, in classrooms, in farms, in workshops, in the dreams of children like Awa and the determination of technicians like Miriam. The new era was unfolding not just in palaces or ministries, but in the hearts and hands of the people. The months that followed the unveiling marked a period unlike any the nation had experienced before. The momentum of the Gold Initiative did not fade as many skeptics had predicted. Instead, it intensified, expanding into new sectors and giving rise to what many began calling the Sahelian Renaissance. It was a phrase first used by a young journalist during a televised interview, and within days it had caught fire across the country, resonating in the hearts of citizens who had long waited for a moment when their nation would step boldly into its destiny. The new refinery became the centerpiece of this transformation. Its hum could be heard across the industrial district, a steady rhythm that workers described as the heartbeat of a new era. Trucks carrying ore from both large mines and newly organized artisanal cooperatives arrived each morning. The workers, men and women, young graduates and seasoned miners, moved with a sense of purpose born from the knowledge that they were not merely laborers but pioneers. Inside the refinery's laboratory, Miriam continued to excel. Her understanding of mineral chemistry grew quickly, impressing even the most experienced specialists. She was soon placed in charge of overseeing the quality analysis team, a responsibility she carried with unwavering dedication. Raghav, her mentor, watched with pride as she trained incoming technicians and refined procedures to improve efficiency. "This is how knowledge becomes permanent," he told her one evening as they reviewed production logs. "When you teach others, you anchor the foundation for generations." Miriam nodded, knowing he was right. She also knew that this refinery was not simply a facility. It was a symbol of what the nation could become: skilled, independent, and respected. But the refinery was only one piece of a much larger transformation. The government's new revenue policies began to take effect, directing funds into infrastructure that many rural communities had been promised for decades. Roads that had long remained dusty paths were paved. Solar-powered microgrids were installed in villages that had lived in darkness for generations. Water systems were repaired, expanded, and protected. And schools, once crumbling under the weight of neglect, were renovated with modern facilities. In Awa's village, the hum of small solar turbines became a nightly melody, blending with the sounds of children playing and elders sharing stories beneath the stars. For the first time, her home had consistent electricity. Her teachers now used digital projectors and interactive tools donated through the new educational partnership. Her world, once limited to dusty textbooks and fading chalkboards, had expanded into a universe of possibilities. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon in shades of crimson and gold, Awa walked to the edge of her village, carrying her school notebook. She sat on a smooth rock overlooking the sand dunes where the desert met the fields. There, beneath the first appearing stars, she drew diagrams of the refinery she had seen in newspapers and imagined herself wearing the lab coat of a metallurgical engineer. Her mother joined her, quietly sitting beside her. "You study like you are preparing for a journey," she said softly. "I am," Awa replied. "I want to help build our future. I want to refine gold, discover new techniques, and make our country proud." Her mother smiled with pride tinged by emotion. "Then you will," she whispered, "because this era belongs to children who dare to dream." As hope spread across the country, so too did vigilance. Leaders knew that progress attracted interest, both supportive and hostile. Smuggling networks continued their attempts to undermine reforms, though their operations grew increasingly difficult as digital tracking systems took hold. Corrupt intermediaries who had once controlled the informal gold trade found themselves squeezed by new transparency measures and cooperative-driven pricing mechanisms. Resistance also came from abroad, not openly, but in subtle forms. International media outlets published opinion pieces questioning the viability of the new model. Analysts warned of geopolitical risks. Anonymous reports predicted financial instability. Yet none of these narratives could dim the pride and determination rising within the nation. In meetings between the government and Indian advisors, discussions shifted from extraction to diversification. Plans were drafted for textile factories, agricultural processing centers, and renewable energy hubs. The leader emphasized repeatedly that gold was the catalyst, not the destination. "Our path to sovereignty is not paved with one resource," he declared during a public address. "It is paved with knowledge, unity, and the courage to invest in ourselves." This philosophy resonated deeply across the country. Farmers began forming cooperatives modeled after the mining groups, gaining negotiating power for their crops. University professors updated curriculums to include mineral economics, industrial design, and South-South cooperation studies. Women's associations used newly available microfinancing to launch businesses. Every sector felt the tremors of transformation. But the most significant shift took place in the national psyche. For the first time in generations, citizens believed not only in the potential of their nation, but in their own agency. The gold bar at the museum became a pilgrimage site for students and tourists alike. Teachers organized field trips where children stared in wonder at the gleaming bar, listening as guides explained how it was refined from or dug from the nation's soil.